Mom screamed to get out and never come back, so I did. Weeks later, Dad asked why I stopped paying the mortgage. My reply shut them down completely. My name is Stephanie Carson, and at 32, I've been secretly paying my parents' mortgage for 5 years. That is, until my mother screamed those words that still echo in my mind, "You're ungrateful. Get out and never come back." So, I did exactly what she asked. My career in financial consulting afforded me the ability to help my family while maintaining my downtown apartment. I never expected gratitude, but I certainly didn't expect to be thrown out of the house I was paying for. Before I tell you how everything fell apart that Sunday afternoon, I grew up in a modest 3-bedroom house in a middle-class neighborhood in Riverside, a small suburb outside Boston. My parents, Carol and Michael Carson, did their best to provide for my younger brother Ryan and me, but money was always tight. Mom worked as a receptionist at a local dentist's office, while Dad jumped between sales jobs, never quite finding his footing in any industry. Despite our financial limitations, education was non-negotiable in our household. I threw myself into my studies, partly because I loved learning, and partly because I recognized early on that academic success was my ticket to a more stable future. High school was a blur of advanced placement classes, volunteer work, and part-time jobs. While my friends were hanging out at the mall, I was tutoring underclassmen for extra cash that mostly went toward household expenses my parents couldn't cover. My hard work paid off when I received a full scholarship to Boston University's School of Business. Those 4 years were transformative. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who shared my ambition and drive. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in finance and landed an entry-level position at Blackwood Consulting, a prestigious financial firm in downtown Boston. Just as my career was taking off, disaster struck at home. The economic downturn hit my father particularly hard. After being laid off from his latest sales position, he struggled to find new employment. At 54, with no specialized skills and an outdated resume, he faced rejection after rejection. Mom's income wasn't enough to cover their expenses, and they fell behind on mortgage payments. I'll never forget the phone call from my tearful mother 7 years ago. "We're going to lose the house, Stephanie," she sobbed. "The bank sent a final notice today." Without hesitation, I drained my modest savings account to bring their mortgage current. But I knew this was a temporary solution at best. After careful consideration, I approached their bank and made an arrangement they rarely offer. I would take over the mortgage payments directly, but keep my parents' names on the loan. The bank manager was skeptical, but agreed after reviewing my financial statements and credit history. My parents would continue believing they were making the payments through an assistance program the bank had supposedly offered them. In reality, I was transferring the exact amount to the bank each month. Meanwhile, my career continued its upward trajectory. By 27, I had been promoted to senior financial consultant at Blackwood, with a corner office and a salary that allowed me to rent a beautiful 1-bedroom apartment in Back Bay. Still, I maintained my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, staying over on weekends and for family dinners. The dynamics in our family had always been challenging. Mom, with her perpetual victim mentality, dominated every conversation with complaints about her job, her health, and the neighbors. Dad retreated further into himself with each passing year, choosing silence over confrontation. Ryan escaped the toxic environment as soon as he could, moving to Seattle for college and rarely returning even for holidays. I was the only one who remained connected, dutifully visiting every Sunday for dinner, listening to Mom's grievances, and offering solutions that were inevitably rejected. "You don't understand what it's like," she would say dismissively. "Your fancy job and apartment don't make you an expert on real life." The irony, of course, was that I understood their financial reality better than they did. I knew exactly how much they owed on their credit cards, substantial, how little they had saved for retirement, almost nothing, and how the house they'd lived in for 30 years would have been foreclosed upon years ago without my intervention. For 5 years, I maintained this precarious balance. I found satisfaction in my career, built meaningful friendships, and even dated occasionally, though relationships often fizzled when men realized how much of my emotional energy was devoted to my family. I told myself it was worth it to preserve the family home, to give my parents stability in their later years. But resentment grew alongside my contributions. Each backhanded comment from Mom about my privileged lifestyle stung more than the last. Each passive nod from Dad as Mom criticized my choices felt increasingly like betrayal. Still, family was family. I had been raised to believe that you stand by your people, no matter what. So I continued paying the mortgage, continued showing up for Sunday dinners, continued pretending that everything was fine. Until that Sunday 3 weeks ago, when everything changed. That particular Sunday began like any other. I arrived at my parents' house around 4 in the afternoon, grocery bags in hand. I always brought the ingredients for dinner, another unacknowledged contribution to the household. There she is, our big city girl. Mom called from the kitchen. I detected the familiar edge in her voice. The one that appeared whenever she referenced my life away from them. I was beginning to think you weren't coming. I told you I'd be here at 4, Mom, I said, setting the bags on the counter and kissing her cheek. It's exactly 4 now. Well, some of us have been up since dawn, she replied, taking the groceries and inspecting them with a critical eye. Must be nice to sleep in on weekends. I bit back a retort about having worked until midnight the night before, finishing a presentation for a major client. It wouldn't make a difference. In Mom's world, my work wasn't real work, not like hers. Dad sat in his recliner in the living room, eyes fixed on a baseball game. Hey kiddo, he said without looking up. That was Dad, physically present but emotionally distant. I'd long ago stopped expecting him to stand up for me when Mom's comments turned acidic. What made this Sunday different was the unexpected presence of my Aunt Patricia, Mom's younger sister. Aunt Patricia lived in New Hampshire and rarely visited. Unlike my mother, she had built a successful career in real estate and traveled extensively. Mom resented her sister's success almost as much as she resented mine. Stephanie. Look at you, more beautiful every time I see you. Aunt Patricia embraced me warmly. Your mom's been telling me about your fancy job. Senior consultant already. Your parents must be bursting with pride. I caught Mom's grimace before she turned back to the stove. Dad remained focused on the television. Thanks, Aunt Patricia. It's good to see you, I said, helping her set the table. As we prepared dinner, Aunt Patricia chatted about her recent trip to Spain, her new condo, and her daughter's college graduation. Mom grew increasingly quiet, her movements becoming sharp and agitated. The tension in the room was palpable by the time we sat down to eat. Halfway through the meal, Aunt Patricia innocently brought up the topic that would detonate our family. Carol, I meant to ask, did you ever work things out with your mortgage? I remember you were worried about foreclosure a few years back. I froze. Fork suspended mid-air. What are you talking about? Mom frowned. We had some trouble when Michael lost his job, but the bank worked with us. We're fine now. Aunt Patricia looked confused. Oh, I thought. She glanced at me, suddenly uncertain. Stephanie mentioned helping you out with that when we had lunch last year. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the blood draining from my face as Mom's eyes narrowed, darting between her sister and me. Stephanie did what? Mom's voice was dangerously quiet. Aunt Patricia, realizing her mistake, backpedaled. I might be misremembering. It was just no. Mom interrupted, eyes fixed on me now. I want to hear what my daughter has been saying behind our backs. I sat down my fork, heart racing. I wasn't saying anything behind your backs, Mom. You just what? She demanded. Been interfering in our financial business, telling people we can't manage our own affairs. Dad finally looked up from his plate. Carol. Maybe we should. No, Michael. I want to hear this. She turned back to me. Well, I took a deep breath. After 5 years of secrecy, maybe it was time for the truth. When Dad lost his job, you were 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank was starting foreclosure proceedings. I paid the outstanding balance and arranged to make the monthly payments directly to the bank. The color drained from Mom's face, then returned with a vengeance. You did what? I've been paying your mortgage for the past 5 years, I said quietly. I wanted to help. And I knew you wouldn't accept it if I offered directly. So you went behind our backs, made us look like charity cases. Mom's voice rose with each question. No one knows except the bank, me, and apparently Aunt Patricia, I said. It wasn't about charity. It was about keeping the family home. The family home? Mom repeated mockingly. You mean, the home you think you own now? Is that why you're always offering suggestions about repairs and renovations? Because you think this is your house. Carol. Dad interjected. Stephanie was just trying to help. Help. Mom laughed bitterly. This isn't help. This is control. This is her thinking she's better than us, that we can't take care of ourselves. That's not true, I protested. I never thought. I know exactly what you thought. Mom cut me off. Poor Mom and Dad. So incompetent they need their successful daughter to rescue them. Did it make you feel important, Stephanie? Did it give you something to brag about to your fancy friends? The injustice of her accusations stung. For 5 years I'd quietly paid their mortgage, never mentioning it to anyone except, apparently, Aunt Patricia during a moment of concern. I'd sacrificed my own financial goals, delayed buying my own home, limited my social life, all to ensure my parents' stability. I wasn't bragging, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I was worried about you losing your home. I had the means to help, so I did. Without asking. Without telling us. Mom's voice grew louder, making decisions about our lives like we're children. I tried to talk to you about your finances before. I reminded her. Every time I brought it up, you shut me down. Said it wasn't my business. It wasn't. It still isn't. Mom stood now, hands planted on the table. We're adults, Stephanie. We don't need our child managing our lives. Dad remained silent, staring at his plate. Aunt Patricia looked like she wanted to disappear. Apparently you did need help, I said, my own anger finally surfacing. The bank was weeks away from taking this house. Everything you've worked for would have been gone. So that gives you the right to go behind our backs? To lie to us for years? Mom's face contorted with rage. Who do you think you are? I'm your daughter, I said, standing to face her. I'm the one who's been keeping a roof over your head while you criticize my life choices and dismiss my career as some sort of glorified hobby. The words hung in the air between us, years of unspoken resentment finally finding voice. Mom's face transformed from red to purple, her hands trembling as she pointed at me across the dinner table. You're ungrateful. Get out and never come back. The room fell silent. Even the background noise of the baseball game seemed to fade away. I stood frozen, the words hitting me like physical blows. Despite the tension that had always existed between us, despite the criticism and passive aggression, she had never explicitly kicked me out before. Carol, Dad began weakly. But Mom wasn't finished. All these years, we've supported you, encouraged you, given you everything. And this is how you repay us? By going behind our backs? By making us look like charity cases? Her voice rose with each accusation. You think your business degree and downtown apartment make you better than us? You think that gives you the right to control our lives? I wasn't trying to control anything, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I was trying to help. Help. Mom laughed. A harsh, brittle sound. No, it's Stephanie. This wasn't help. This was you playing savior. This was you needing to feel superior. That's not fair, I protested, tears welling in my eyes. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Mom's voice grew even louder. Is it fair that you've been lying to us for years? Is it fair that you've been discussing our private business with Patricia? She gestured wildly toward my aunt, who seemed to shrink in her chair. I didn't mean. Aunt Patricia started, but Mom cut her off with a raised hand. And you, she turned back to me, with your perfect little life, and your perfect little career. Never married, barely dating. Spending your weekends with your parents because you have nothing better to do. Using our financial problems to make yourself feel important. Each word was a dagger precisely aimed at my deepest insecurities. I looked to Dad, silently pleading for intervention, but he remained quiet, eyes fixed on his plate. His silence felt like a betrayal worse than Mom's words. I think you should leave, Mom said, her voice suddenly cold and controlled. And don't bother coming back next Sunday, or any Sunday. Since you seem to think this is your house, let me make it clear. It's not. It's our home, and you're no longer welcome in it. The finality in her tone made my stomach drop. I stood there, tears now flowing freely down my cheeks, unable to form a response. Carol, that's enough. Dad finally said, but it was too little. Too late. Fine, I whispered, grabbing my purse from the back of my chair. If that's what you want, I'll go. Stephanie. Wait. Aunt Patricia called after me as I headed for the stairs. She doesn't mean it. She's just upset. But I knew my mother. Once she made a declaration like this, she rarely backed down, and something inside me had finally broken. 5 years of unacknowledged support, of criticism and judgment, of walking on eggshells, it all culminated in this moment of absolute rejection. I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, the room I still used during weekend visits. Looking around at the remnants of my youth, debate trophies, honor roll certificates, framed college degree, I felt a profound sense of disconnect. These achievements that had once seemed so important now felt hollow in the face of my mother's dismissal. I grabbed an overnight bag from the closet and stuffed it with the essentials, the clothes I kept here, toiletries, a few books. My hands moved mechanically while my mind reeled. Was this really happening? Was I really being thrown out of the house I had financially supported for years? As I packed, I could hear the muffled sounds of argument continuing downstairs, Mom's strident tones, Dad's quieter responses, and Patricia's attempts at mediation. None of it mattered anymore. A line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. I took one last look around the room. At the twin bed where I'd spent countless nights dreaming of a future where I could help my family, where my success would bring us all security and happiness. What a foolish dream that had been. With my bag slung over my shoulder, I descended the stairs. The argument in the dining room fell silent as I appeared. "Stephanie," Dad started, rising from his chair, but I shook my head. "Don't," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Just don't. I've heard enough." "You're really leaving?" "Just like that," Mom's tone suggested. She hadn't expected me to actually go, despite her explicit demand. "Isn't that what you want?" I asked. "For me to get out and never come back?" "Those were your exact words." Mom crossed her arms, a gesture of defiance I'd seen countless times throughout my childhood. "If you walk out that door, don't expect things to go back to normal the next time you decide to grace us with your presence." I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time seeing her not as my mother but as a person, flawed, insecure, and ultimately unable to accept help without perceiving it as criticism. "Goodbye, Mom," I said simply. "Dad, Aunt Patricia, I'm sorry about dinner." I walked out the front door without looking back, the sound of it closing behind me strangely final. In my car, I sat for several minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, tears blurring my vision. The house I'd preserved for my family now stood as a monument to misplaced loyalty and unappreciated sacrifice. The drive back to my apartment passed in a haze of disbelief and pain. Traffic lights changed, other cars moved around me, but I barely registered any of it. By the time I pulled into my building's parking garage, my shock had begun to give way to a different emotion, resolve. In my apartment, I dropped my bag in the entryway and went straight to my home office. Opening my laptop, I navigated to my bank's website and found the automatic transfer I'd set up 5 years ago. $1,875 on the first of every month to my parents' mortgage company. My finger hovered over the cancel recurring payment button. Was I really going to do this? After 5 years of ensuring my parents' housing security, could I really just stop? Get out and never come back? Mom's words echoed in my mind. I clicked the button. A confirmation window appeared. "Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment?" I clicked yes. Just like that, it was done. After 5 years and over $110,000 in payments, I had severed the financial tie that bound me to my parents' home. The relief I expected didn't come. Instead, a profound emptiness settled in my chest as I closed the laptop. That night, I removed myself from the family group chat, unfriended both parents on social media, and turned off my phone. Whatever came next, I needed space to process the seismic shift in my family dynamic. As I finally fell into a restless sleep, one thought provided a small measure of comfort. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely untethered from my parents' financial problems. Whatever happened to them now was not my responsibility. The freedom felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The first week after the confrontation passed in a blur of emotional extremes. During the day, I threw myself into work with an intensity that surprised even my most ambitious colleagues. Nights were different. Alone in my apartment, doubts crept in. Had I overreacted? Should I have tried harder to explain? Was cutting off the mortgage payments too drastic? My phone remained off for the first 3 days. When I finally powered it back on, there were no messages from either parent. The silence hurt more than I expected. Despite everything, some childish part of me had hoped they would reach out, apologize, acknowledge their mistake. On day 4, my best friend Kimberly staged what she called an intervention at my apartment, arriving unannounced with takeout and wine. "You look terrible," she announced as I opened the door. "Thanks. Come right in," I replied dryly, stepping aside to let her pass. Kimberly was one of the few people who knew about my financial support of my parents. She'd been advising me to stop for years, calling it a toxic arrangement that enabled my mother's emotional manipulation. "So you finally did it," she said, unpacking containers of Thai food on my kitchen counter. "You finally stood up to Carol the Terrible." Despite everything, I felt a flare of defensiveness. "Don't call her that." Kimberly raised an eyebrow. "The woman kicks you out of the house you've been paying for, and you're still defending her?" "She's still my mother," I said quietly. "And that's exactly the problem. Kimberly handed me a glass of wine. Your mother knows exactly how to push your buttons because she installed them. You need perspective stuff. What would you tell a client who was in your situation? She had a point. As a financial consultant, I'd advised numerous clients to disentangle their finances from family members who took advantage. Why had I been unable to follow my own professional advice? That night, after Kimberly left, I did something I'd been avoiding. I called my brother Ryan in Seattle. About time, he said when I told him what had happened. I've been telling you for years that they're emotional vampires, especially Mom. They're not that bad, I said automatically. Stephanie, she threw you out of the house you've been paying for because you had the audacity to help them. In what universe is that not that bad? When he put it that way, it was hard to argue. We talked for over an hour, the longest conversation we'd had in years. Ryan had distanced himself from our parents long ago, limiting contact to brief calls on holidays and birthdays. He'd recognized the toxicity of our family dynamic and chosen self-preservation. I'd chosen sacrifice. Now we were comparing notes on how those choices had shaped our lives. You should come visit, he suggested before we hung up. Seattle's beautiful in the summer. Get some distance, clear your head. I promised to think about it, feeling lighter after our conversation. Ryan understood in a way no one else could. He'd grown up in the same household with the same dynamics. His validation meant more than I expected. The 2-week mark arrived, the day when the first mortgage payment would have been due since I canceled the automatic transfer. I found myself checking my phone more frequently, half expecting frantic calls from my parents. Nothing came. On day 16, the first text from Dad appeared. How's work going? Mom made pot roast yesterday. The casual tone, as if nothing had happened, was so typical of my father that I almost laughed. His lifelong strategy of ignoring conflict was on full display. I didn't respond. 3 days later, another text. Having trouble with the online banking. Can you help? Again. I didn't respond. The vague reference to banking problems was clearly about the mortgage, but he couldn't bring himself to address it directly. By the beginning of week 3, the messages became more frequent and less subtle. Dad, bank called about the mortgage. Must be some mistake. Dad, can you call when you get a chance? Important. Dad, Stephanie, please respond. It's about the house. Still, I maintained my silence. Years of unacknowledged support had culminated in being thrown out. If they wanted to discuss the mortgage now, they would need to acknowledge what had happened. Then came the first contact from Mom, 20 days after she told me to get out and never come back. The bank says we're behind on payments. Fix this immediately. No acknowledgement of her words or actions. Just a demand that I fix the problem. The audacity was breathtaking. More messages followed, increasing in urgency as the bank presumably began their collection process. Dad, we received a late notice from the bank. They're threatening additional fees. Mom, I don't know what game you're playing, but it needs to stop. Call me. Dad, please call. Mom's very upset about the bank letters. The old Stephanie would have caved by now, called the bank, and made arrangements to bring the mortgage current. But something fundamental had shifted inside me during those 3 weeks of separation. I'd started therapy at Kimberly's insistence with a counselor who specialized in family dynamics. Dr. Matthews had introduced me to concepts like emotional blackmail and financial enabling that put my relationship with my parents in a harsh but clarifying light. 25 days after the confrontation, the message I'd been both dreading and expecting arrived from Dad. Bank called. They've started foreclosure proceedings. We need to talk. I stared at my phone, heart pounding. This was the moment of truth. The house I'd grown up in, the home I'd secretly preserved for years, was now at risk. And for the first time, I recognized a simple truth. It wasn't my responsibility to save it. That evening, my doorman called up to announce a visitor. Michael Carson is here to see you, Miss Carson. Should I send him up? Dad had never visited my apartment before. In the 5 years I'd lived there, neither of my parents had shown any interest in seeing my home. I'll come down, I told the doorman, not ready to welcome Dad into my personal space. In the lobby, Dad looked smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched, his expression anxious. When he saw me, relief washed over his face. Stephanie, thank God. You haven't been answering our calls or texts. We've been worried sick. The concern might have touched me once. Now I recognized it for what it was. Concern about the foreclosure, not about me. Hi Dad, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Why are you here? He glanced around the lobby, clearly uncomfortable having this conversation in a semi-public space. "Can we talk somewhere private?" "We can sit over there," I said, gesturing to a small seating area in the corner of the lobby. It was empty, offering minimal privacy without the intimacy of my apartment. As we sat down, I noticed how tired Dad looked. The past 3 weeks had clearly taken a toll on him. For a moment, guilt tugged at my heart, but I pushed it away. I hadn't created this situation. I had simply stopped enabling it. "Stephanie," he began, his voice low and urgent, "why did you stop paying the mortgage?" The directness of Dad's question caught me off guard. After years of avoiding difficult conversations, years of dancing around the truth, he had finally asked something straightforward. It was almost refreshing. "Why do you think, Dad?" I asked, maintaining eye contact. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Is this about what your mother said? You know how she gets. She didn't mean it." "Which part didn't she mean? The part where she called me ungrateful? Or the part where she told me to get out and never come back?" Dad winced. "She was upset. You know how she is when she feels attacked." "I wasn't attacking her," I said, keeping my voice calm and measured despite the emotions churning inside me. "It was explaining that I've been paying your mortgage for 5 years. That's not an attack, it's a fact." But stopping the payments without warning, he trailed off, running a hand through his thinning hair. "The bank says they're starting foreclosure proceedings. We can't afford the payments on our own, Stephanie. You know that." And there it was, the admission I'd been waiting for. They had known all along that they couldn't afford their house. They had been relying on my secret support, even while criticizing my life choices and dismissing my achievements. "I'm aware," I said. "I've been aware for 5 years. That's why I started making the payments in the first place." "Then why stop now?" There was genuine confusion in his voice, as if he couldn't comprehend why his daughter would suddenly refuse to continue supporting them after being thrown out of their house. "Mom told me to get out and never come back," I said simply. "I'm respecting her wishes." "She didn't mean, yes, she did," I interrupted, suddenly tired of excuses. "In that moment she absolutely meant it. And not once in the 3 weeks since has she called to apologize or even acknowledge what happened. Not once has she thanked me for the 5 years of support I've provided. Instead, she sent a text demanding that I fix the mortgage problem, as if it's my responsibility to maintain a house I'm no longer welcome in." Dad fell silent, his eyes dropping to his hands. For the first time, I wondered if he was actually hearing me. "Dad, do you realize what you're asking? You want me to continue paying for a house that I've been explicitly told I'm not welcome in. How does that make sense?" "She was just angry," he mumbled, but the defense sounded weak even to him. "And I'm hurt," I countered. "I've spent years supporting you both, emotionally and financially. I've endured Mom's criticism, her backhanded comments about my career and life choices. I've watched you sit silently by while she belittled me. And when the truth finally came out about the mortgage, instead of gratitude, I got accusations and rejection." He looked up, and I saw something unexpected in his eyes. "Shame. We've relied on you too much," he admitted quietly. It wasn't fair. The simple acknowledgement after years of silence and avoidance hit me harder than I expected. My throat tightened, and I had to take a deep breath before responding. "No, it wasn't," I agreed. "It wasn't fair to expect me to subsidize your lifestyle while treating me like I was somehow less worthy of respect because of my success. I never thought." "That's just it, Dad." I cut in gently. "You never thought about it at all. You accepted the arrangement because it was convenient. You let Mom dictate the emotional tone of our family because confronting her was too difficult. You've been a passive observer in your own life, and you've allowed her to treat me terribly because standing up to her would disrupt your comfort." The harsh truth hung between us. Dad's shoulders slumped further, and for a moment, I thought he might cry. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "You're right. I've failed you, Stephanie. As a father, I should have protected you, supported you. Instead, I let your mother's insecurities and jealousy dictate how we treated you." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I'm sorry. Truly sorry. In all my years, I could count on one hand the number of times I'd heard my father apologize for anything." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and despite everything, I felt a small crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "But an apology from you isn't enough. Mom needs to acknowledge what happened and take responsibility for her words and actions." Dad nodded slowly. "She's struggling, Stephanie. The bank letters, the threat of foreclosure, It's forcing her to confront some hard truths about our financial situation and how we've treated you. She's not in a good place. That's not my responsibility, I said more sharply than I intended. Softening my tone, I added, I can't keep setting myself on fire to keep you both warm. It's destroying me. I understand, Dad said, and for once, I believed he actually did. What do you need from us? What would make this right? The question surprised me. In all our years of family dysfunction, no one had ever asked what I needed. I took a moment to consider my answer carefully. I need Mom to apologize. Genuinely apologize. Not just because she wants the mortgage payments to resume. I need acknowledgement of the support I've provided and the way I've been treated. And most importantly, I need to establish clear boundaries moving forward. Our relationship can't continue as it has been. Dad nodded thoughtfully. Would you be willing to come to the house for conversation? All three of us, talking openly and honestly. The prospect of returning to the house where I'd been rejected was daunting. But I recognized the necessity of facing this situation directly. Under certain conditions, I said, it needs to be a calm, respectful discussion. At the first sign of Mom becoming defensive or attacking, I'm leaving. And I want it clear that I'm not committing to resuming the mortgage payments. That will depend entirely on how the conversation goes. That's fair, Dad agreed, a hint of relief in his voice. When would you be willing to meet? We settled on the following Sunday, exactly 4 weeks after the confrontation that had shattered our family dynamic. As Dad rose to leave, he hesitated, then stepped forward and embraced me awkwardly. It was the first time he had initiated physical affection in years. I'm proud of you, Stephanie, he whispered. I should have told you that a long time ago. After he left, I remained in the lobby seating area, processing what had just happened. The conversation had gone nothing like I expected. Instead of manipulation and guilt-tripping, Dad had actually listened. He had acknowledged his role in our dysfunctional family system. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. Back in my apartment, I called my therapist for an emergency session to prepare for the upcoming family meeting. Dr. Matthews helped me develop strategies for maintaining boundaries, recognizing manipulation tactics, and expressing my needs clearly, without being derailed by emotional responses. Remember, she advised as our session ended, you're not responsible for their reactions or emotions. You can only control your own behavior. Stay grounded in your truth. I spent the days leading up to Sunday's meeting alternating between determination and anxiety. Kimberly offered to be on call during the meeting, ready to provide an escape or support if needed. Ryan called daily from Seattle, coaching me through potential scenarios and reminding me that I had the right to walk away if things turned toxic. When Sunday arrived, I drove to my parents' house with a strange sense of detachment. This building that had once been home now felt foreign, a sight of pain rather than comfort. As I parked in the driveway, I took several deep breaths, centering myself in the way Dr. Matthews had taught me. You've got this, I whispered to myself as I approached the front door. Whatever happens, you're going to be okay. I rang the doorbell rather than using my key, a small act that symbolized my new status as a visitor rather than a member of the household. Dad opened the door immediately as if he'd been waiting nearby. Stephanie, he said with evident relief. Your mother's in the living room. I stepped inside, bracing myself for whatever came next. The familiar scent of the house, a mixture of Mom's floral perfume and the lemon polish Dad used on the furniture, brought a wave of nostalgia that I quickly suppressed. This wasn't about the past. It was about defining the future. Mom sat rigidly on the couch, her face a careful mask. Dad took a seat beside her, leaving me the armchair across from them. The coffee table between us felt like a demilitarized zone. Thank you for coming, Dad began, clearly having rehearsed this opening. We appreciate you being willing to talk. I nodded but didn't speak, waiting to see how Mom would respond. For several uncomfortable seconds, silence filled the room. Finally, she cleared her throat. The bank called again yesterday, she said. They're moving forward with foreclosure proceedings. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement. Just another statement about the mortgage. I felt disappointment settle in my stomach. Is that all you have to say to me? I asked quietly. Mom's eyes flashed with a familiar defensiveness, but Dad placed a hand on her arm, a silent reminder of whatever conversation they'd had before my arrival. Mom faltered, then tried again. I may have overreacted that day. May have, I echoed. Dad gave her an encouraging nod. I did overreact, she amended, the words clearly difficult for her. I shouldn't have told you to leave. It was a start, however small. Why did you? I asked, maintaining eye contact. Mom shifted uncomfortably. I was embarrassed. Humiliated, finding out that you'd been paying our mortgage for years, that we couldn't manage on our own, and in front of Patricia of all people. The mention of Aunt Patricia's name revealed more than Mom probably intended. This wasn't just about the mortgage. It was about appearance, about pride, about her ongoing competition with her more successful sister. So your pride was more important than acknowledging the help I've provided for 5 years? I kept my tone neutral, not accusatory. It wasn't like that, Mom protested, but Dad interjected. Yes, it was, Carol. That's exactly what it was like. His firm tone surprised both Mom and me. Our pride, our unwillingness to admit we needed help, led us to take advantage of Stephanie's generosity while never properly acknowledging or thanking her. Mom's lips thinned into a line, but she didn't contradict him. Progress of a sort. I decided it was time to lay everything on the table. Reaching into my bag, I withdrew a folder containing printouts of every mortgage payment I'd made over the past 5 years. I placed it on the coffee table and slid it toward them. This is what I've contributed, I said simply. $112,500 over 5 years. Every payment made on time, without fanfare or acknowledgement, all while enduring criticism about my career, my lifestyle, and my choices. Mom stared at the folder, but didn't open it. Dad reached for it with trembling hands, flipping through the pages with growing dismay. I had no idea it was this much, he murmured. That's because neither of you ever asked, I pointed out. You accepted the help without question, without gratitude, and ultimately with resentment rather than appreciation. Mom's eyes remained fixed on the folder, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I don't know what to say. Thank you would be a start, I suggested, followed by a genuine apology for the things you said when you threw me out of this house. She flinched at my directness, but finally raised her eyes to meet mine. Thank you, she said, the words sounding strange coming from her. And I'm sorry for what I said. I didn't mean it. It wasn't perfect. There was still a defensive quality to her tone, but it was more than I'd ever received from her before. I nodded my acknowledgement, waiting to see if she would elaborate. I was jealous, she admitted after another long pause, surprising me with her candor. Watching you succeed, build your career, afford things we never could, it made me feel like a failure. Like, everything your father and I worked for wasn't good enough. I never thought that, I said softly. I know. That was my issue, not yours. Mom's hands twisted in her lap. And then finding out you've been paying the mortgage, it felt like charity, like pity. It was easier to be angry than grateful. The raw honesty of her words struck me. This was the most genuine conversation we'd ever had about our relationship. Where do we go from here? Dad asked, looking between Mom and me. I took a deep breath. This was the moment to establish the new terms of our relationship, to set the boundaries I'd needed for years. First, we need to be clear about the house, I said. I'm not resuming the mortgage payments. Mom's face fell, but she nodded stiffly. Instead, I continued. I'm willing to help you develop a plan for financial independence. That might mean downsizing to a home you can actually afford, creating a realistic budget, or exploring other options for your retirement years. But whatever happens, it needs to be sustainable without my ongoing financial support. Dad nodded thoughtfully. That's more than fair. Second, our relationship needs to change, I said firmly. No more criticism of my career or lifestyle. No more passive-aggressive comments. No more expectations that I'll drop everything when you need something. I'm your daughter, not your personal bank or emotional punching bag. Mom flinched at my words, but didn't argue. And finally I concluded, I need time and space to heal. This breach of trust being thrown out of the family home, it's gonna take time for me to process and move past it. I'm not cutting you off, but I am establishing boundaries. Sunday dinners will be occasional, not weekly. Phone calls will be when I have the emotional energy, not on demand. And any further financial support will be discussed openly and acknowledged appropriately. A heavy silence fell as my parents absorbed these conditions. Part of me expected resistance, particularly from Mom. Instead, she surprised me again. You've become quite the strong woman, she said, a strange note of wonder in her voice. I don't know that I would have had the courage to do what you're doing. Coming from my mother, this was as close to approval as I'd ever received. We'll respect your boundaries, Dad promised, and we'll work with you on the financial plan. It's past time we took responsibility for our own situation. As I drove away from the house an hour later, having discussed initial steps for their financial planning, I felt lighter than I had in years. the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Decades of dysfunctional patterns couldn't be erased in a single conversation. But for the first time I saw the possibility of a healthier relationship with my parents. And more importantly, I had finally found my voice, and the courage to use it. The weeks following our family meeting marked the beginning of a tentative new chapter in our relationship. True to my word, I helped my parents explore their financial options without resuming the mortgage payments. The process was revealing and occasionally painful for all of us. "What do you mean we need to sell the house?" Mom asked during our first financial planning session at their kitchen table. "This is our home. We've lived here for 30 years. The numbers don't lie," I explained gently, pointing to the spreadsheet I'd created. "Your combined income simply isn't enough to cover the mortgage, property taxes, and maintenance costs, let alone your other expenses and saving for retirement." Dad, to his credit, had been studying the figures intently. "She's right, Carol. We're underwater here. We have been for years." Mom's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue further. The bank's foreclosure notices, arriving with increasing frequency, provided a sobering reality check that even she couldn't ignore. I helped them research smaller homes and condos in more affordable neighborhoods. Initially, Mom resisted every option I presented. Too small. Bad school district. Despite the fact that no children lived in their home, I don't like the kitchen layout. Dad, surprisingly, became the voice of reason. "Carol, we need to be realistic. We can't afford to be picky." His newfound assertiveness surprised both Mom and me. It was as if our confrontation had awakened something in him. A willingness to engage rather than retreat. To face problems head-on rather than avoiding them. 3 weeks into our house hunting, we found a 2-bedroom condo in a pleasant community, about 20 minutes from their current neighborhood. The price was within their budget, especially after selling their current home, and the reduced space meant lower utility bills and maintenance costs. "I could see us here," Dad said, as we toured the unit. "It's bright, modern, and the association takes care of the exterior maintenance." Mom wandered through the rooms, her expression unreadable. Finally, she stopped in the living room, looking out through sliding glass doors to a small patio. "It's not our house," she said quietly. "No," I agreed. "It's not. But it could be your home. One that you can actually afford on your own." She turned to me, and I was startled to see tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Stefani. For everything. For taking your help for granted, for not appreciating what you are doing for us, for the things I said." The apology, unexpected and seemingly sincere, caught me off guard. Mom had never been one to admit fault or express remorse. I approached her cautiously, and after a moment's hesitation, took her hand. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "It means a lot." She nodded, quickly wiping away her tears. "This place will do," she announced, her practical tone returning. "If your father likes it, we'll make an offer." That evening, we sat together at their kitchen table, soon to be their former kitchen table, and I helped them compose an offer letter for the condo. As we worked, I noticed a new dynamic emerging between my parents. Dad was more vocal, offering opinions and making decisions rather than deferring to Mom as he had for decades. Mom, surprisingly, was listening to him, actually considering his input rather than dismissively overruling him. "You two seem different," I observed as we finished the paperwork. Dad glanced at Mom, a small smile playing at his lips. "Let's just say we've had some long overdue conversations. After you left that day," Mom added, not meeting my eyes, "your father finally stood up to me, told me exactly what he thought about how I'd treated you all these years. It wasn't pretty," Dad admitted, "but it was necessary." The revelation that Dad had defended me, had actually confronted Mom about her behavior, was both shocking and deeply moving. All those years of silence, of passive acceptance, perhaps he had been paying more attention than I'd realized. Their offer on the condo was accepted, and we entered the whirlwind process of preparing their house for sale. Decades of accumulated possessions had to be sorted, sold, donated, or discarded. It was physically exhausting but emotionally clarifying for all of us. "Do we really need 5 sets of dishes?" I asked Mom as we tackled the kitchen cabinets. She held a chipped plate from a set I remembered from early childhood. "This was my mother's," she said softly. "But no, we don't need 5 sets." By the time we finished, they had downsized their possessions by more than half. The house, cleared of clutter and freshly painted, sold within 2 weeks for enough to pay off the remaining mortgage and provide a comfortable cushion for their new life. Moving day was bittersweet. As the last boxes were loaded onto the truck, I found Mom standing in the empty living room, looking around with a mixture of sadness and resignation. 30 years. she murmured as I approached. "We brought you and Ryan home to this house. You took your first steps right there." She pointed to a spot near the fireplace. "It's just a house, Mom," I said gently. "The memories come with us." She nodded, blinking rapidly. "You're right. And this new place, it's a fresh start. For all of us." The day they moved into the condo, I helped them unpack and arrange their remaining furniture. The smaller space actually suited their reduced possessions perfectly, creating a cozy, manageable environment. By evening we had the essentials unpacked, and I ordered takeout for the three of us. As we sat at their new dining table, eating Chinese food from containers, Dad raised his water glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said. "And to our daughter, who had the courage to force us to face reality." Mom raised her glass as well. "To Stephanie," she echoed, meeting my eyes with genuine warmth. "Thank you." It wasn't a perfect resolution. Decades of dysfunctional patterns couldn't be erased in a few weeks, but it was a start. A foundation for a healthier relationship built on honesty, respect, and appropriate boundaries. As I prepared to leave that evening, Mom hesitated, then hugged me. Not the perfunctory embrace she'd offered in the past, but a real hug, tight and lingering. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. "All of us." For the first time in years, I believed her. 6 months have passed since that tumultuous Sunday dinner that changed everything. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much has shifted in such a relatively short time. The journey hasn't been easy or linear, but the transformation in my relationship with my parents has been profound. Mom and Dad have settled into their condo, creating a comfortable home that genuinely reflects their current life stage. The financial plan we developed together has given them stability and independence for the first time in years. They live within their means now, no longer relying on my secret support to maintain an unsustainable lifestyle. Dad has taken charge of their finances, meticulously tracking expenses and planning for their retirement. He's found purpose in this role, often calling me to proudly report how they've stayed under budget for the month, or managed to add to their modest savings. The passive man who once avoided conflict at all costs has been replaced by someone who actively engages with life's challenges. Mom's transformation has been more nuanced, but equally significant. She still struggles with expressing gratitude or admitting fault, but she's making visible efforts to change patterns established over a lifetime. The criticism and backhanded comments that once characterized our interactions have largely disappeared. In their place is a tentative appreciation for who I am, not who she wishes I would be. Last month, she surprised me by asking thoughtful questions about my latest project at work, actually listening to my responses without dismissive comments about my fancy job. It was a small moment, but it represented enormous progress. Our relationship has found a new rhythm. We speak on the phone once a week rather than my previous daily calls, fielding complaints and crises. Sunday dinners happen monthly instead of weekly, and I leave these gatherings feeling energized, rather than drained. Most importantly, I no longer measure my worth as a daughter by the sacrifices I make or the financial support I provide. My relationship with Ryan has deepened as well. I took his advice and visited Seattle for a week in the summer. Away from the familiar pressures of Boston, we reconnected as adults, sharing our parallel journeys of establishing boundaries with our parents. He's even made plans to visit our parents' new condo next month, his first trip home in nearly 3 years. "They seem different from your descriptions," he admitted during our last phone call. "Less toxic, maybe even normal." I laughed at that. I wouldn't go that far. But they're trying, and that counts for something. Professionally, I've continued to thrive. Without the constant drain of family drama and financial obligation, I've had more emotional and mental energy to invest in my career. Last month, I was promoted to executive consultant with a significant salary increase and additional leadership responsibilities. When I shared the news with my parents, both offered genuine congratulations without qualifications or jealousy. My personal life has blossomed too. For years, romantic relationships took a back seat to family obligations and career demands. The emotional energy required to manage my parents left little capacity for building meaningful connections. Now, I'm 3 months into a promising relationship with James, a lawyer I met through a friend's dinner party. He's kind, thoughtful, and most importantly, respectful of my boundaries. "Your family sounds complicated," he commented after I shared an abbreviated version of recent events. But whose isn't? That simple acknowledgement, that family complexity is universal rather than something to be ashamed of, was refreshingly validating. The greatest change, though, has been internal. The guilt that once permeated my existence has largely dissipated. I no longer feel responsible for my parents' financial security or emotional well-being. I've recognized the difference between supporting and enabling, between generosity and martyrdom. Dr. Matthews, my therapist, has helped me understand that my worth isn't tied to what I provide for others. You are valuable simply because you exist, she reminded me in our most recent session. Not because you pay bills or solve problems or sacrifice your needs for others. It's a simple concept, but one that's taken me 32 years to truly internalize. Looking back at that painful Sunday confrontation, I can now see it as the necessary catalyst for change. My mother's harsh words, "You're ungrateful. Get out and never come back," initially felt like rejection. In reality, they forced a long overdue reckoning with unhealthy family dynamics that had persisted for decades. Sometimes, relationships need to break before they can be rebuilt on healthier foundations. The mortgage payments I secretly made for years enabled a dysfunctional system to continue. It wasn't until I stopped, until I respected my mother's words literally and removed myself from the equation, that genuine change became possible. The most valuable lesson I've learned through this journey is that true love includes boundaries. Sacrificing my own well-being to shield my parents from the consequences of their financial choices wasn't actually loving. It was codependent. Real love means wanting the best for others while also honoring your own needs and limitations. I still care deeply about my parents' welfare, but I now express that care in healthier ways, offering guidance rather than rescue, support rather than salvation. The result has been transformative for all of us. They've developed resilience and self-sufficiency they never knew they possessed, while I've discovered freedom from the crushing weight of inappropriate responsibility. If you're watching this and recognizing patterns from your own life, the constant sacrifices, the unacknowledged support, the emotional manipulation, please know that change is possible. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for healthy relationships. You deserve appreciation for your contributions. You deserve respect for your choices. Most importantly, you deserve relationships that energize rather than deplete you. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? How did it change your relationship? Share your experiences in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Take care. Good luck.